Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, entertaining you with reading fun things to help get us through the coronavirus mishigas. Way back in the early 1990s, I was introduced to Dave Howell, who worked for a company that I had never heard of called Wizards of the Coast. Not too many other people had heard of them yet either. They were just launching a new collectible card game called Magic the Gathering. Within a couple of years, Magic had completely taken the world by storm. And in fact, still to some extent has taken the world by storm. While the game isn't as popular as it was in the 1990s, it's still pretty darn popular. And it became a huge hit, not just as a card game, but then also there was fiction, there were comic books, all sorts of stuff. Wizards of the Coast eventually became a major powerhouse in the gaming industry. And back in 1996, they published an anthology called Distant Shores. It was the second anthology that they did, and I was lucky enough to have a story in it. It was actually only my third published story after two Marvel comic stories I had done in 94 and 95. This was my first non-Marvel story, and it was quite a thrill to be part of this, and I really enjoyed it. I also haven't read it in a very long time, so hopefully it's still good. We'll find out. Anyway, this is God's Sins by Keith R.A. DeCandido in Magic the Gathering Distant Plains, originally published in January of 1996. The island hadn't changed very much in the 1,000 years since I'd been there last. For some reason, this surprised me. Then again, there are limits. After all, the island was remote, physically isolated from the rest of the world, populated mainly by humans who survived primarily by the fishing trade, secondarily through farming. Very little of that was likely to change when you got right down to it. I returned home by boat. It had been a long time since I traveled in so mundane a manner. I must confess, I had completely forgotten about its deleterious effects. The first trick we learn is control over the body. So for my body to so thoroughly rebel against me in response to the ship's bucking and weaving was something of a shock. I could have eliminated the queasiness, but the point of this was to move away from my past life, to get away from the madness once and for all. We are a rare breed, if breed is the right word. In any case, we are few. The names for us are manifold. Mage, wizard, demiurge, planeswalker, demon, gatherer. Choose which one you prefer. Long ago, I mastered the art of understanding any form of communication I was presented with, so the intricacies of language hold no interest for me. Of course, the most common word is God. It's also probably the most accurate. Occasionally, and apparently at random, someone, human, elven, dragon, whatever, is born with the ability to harness the forces of the earth. Again, the nomenclature varies depending on who you ask, but it's basically power. Very few have the power, and those of us who do tend to use it to better ourselves. It's when one of us tries to better ourselves to the detriment of another of us that the problems start. I was as bad as any of them. I clashed with many a fellow wizard, but I always won in the end. I was unstoppable, invincible, insatiable. I used and abused anything I felt I needed at the time, from the noblest elf to the dimmest orc, from the craftiest goblin to the most savage sea serpent. Sometimes I would rule a land overtly. I may have even done it here on the island where I was born. One loses track. So many centuries, so many conquests, so many times growing bored and moving on. In a sense, that's what's happened now. Except there was nowhere else to move on to. I had reached the stage where I could do anything. Who would have thought that one with the ability to do anything would find himself with nothing to do? Semantics again. Perhaps it's part of my new worldview. You see, I've given it all up. That's why I travel home by ship, nausea and all, rather than simply traveling there under my own power. From this day forth, I shall no longer be a god or a king or a wizard. I have been all that and more in 1,000 years of life. Now, I shall be a simple human among other humans. It isn't as easy as it looks. My vow not to use my power fell by the wayside fairly early on in my endeavor. For one thing, finding arable land that I could take over would have been impossible had I not taken a stretch of barren land and made it farmable. The island, which was now called Cartia, indeed that may have been its name when I grew up here, had had a bad run of crops over the previous years, and had stayed solvent mainly through the fishing trade. So I used my power a bit, pushing the soil in the direction I wanted rather than the direction nature had ordained. Then again, changing the course of nature is what we do. However, I only did it up to a point. I made the land ready to be farmed, and I manipulated tools more efficiently than a normal person would, but I farmed that land. And I got results. Fruits, vegetables, herbs. I even grew Gearselm artichokes, an odd name that they are neither from Gearselm nor do they remotely resemble artichokes, but they're difficult to grow and harder to sell because the majority of humans can't stand the things. But I knew elves were fond of them, and so was able to arrange to have my yield sold to the elven boat captain who brought me to Cartia. Within a couple of years, I had a viable farm. I didn't really require the food or the money that selling the crops brought in, but I got an immense personal satisfaction from the whole endeavor. However, even personally satisfying work grows tiresome after a while, year after year, so I decided to vary the routine by hiring some locals to do the actual work on the farm while I supervised. We always fall back into the old patterns, don't we? Here I'd intended to become just like every other ordinary person on the planet, and what happens? I find myself becoming Lord of the Manor again. The king, the ruler, the supervisor, the god. Or at least that's what I'd intended. I ran into a bit of a snag when the two young brothers, Feral and Dovroder, agreed to work for me, then arrived at the farm and asked where the plow was. I stared at them blankly. The what?
The plow. You know, to plow the fields with.
What purpose does that serve? I asked. They exchanged confused glances. Then they stared at my farm as if it would provide answers.
You can't farm without plowing the fields.
I finally realized what they meant. Oh, you mean a machine? Well, that's hardly necessary. After all, I hesitated. On those rare occasions when I actually communicate with mortals, I use the language in their own minds, but the Cartian tongue had no words for the concepts I needed to convey. Lamely, I finished, "Do it!" Again, Feral and Dovroder exchanged glances, but their expressions were more confused, strained. It was hard to tell. It had been so long since I paid attention to mortal body language.
Sir, if you please, what is your name?
I blinked. A name? I had so many. It was hard to choose. The one I was fondest of was Rafe. And fortuitously, there was an image in Dovroder's mind of someone named Rafthrasa that I reminded him of. Rafe was a legitimate abbreviation for such a name, so I said, Rafthrasa, but most simply call me Rafe. Before I even finished the sentence, their eyes widened and they fell to their knees. "What are you doing?"
"It is you, my lord,"
Feral said.
"Return to us as was prophesied."
"I beg your pardon?" Dovroder replied, "Please instruct we who have cited you, that we may bring your word to all who worship your greatness." This was starting to annoy me. "Will you please get up?" They rose. "What are you blathering on about?"
"You have returned to us, my lord. Please instruct us that we may do your bidding."
I couldn't believe it. "Get out of here!" I bellowed. Behind me, thunder cracked the clear sky. This time, I could read Feral and Dovroder's body language quite clearly. They were scared. They practically tripped over themselves, fleeing my wrath. Once they were out of sight, I dispelled the brewing storm my anger had started. I didn't want a rainstorm right now. It'd be bad for the crops. A god. They thought I was a god. After a moment's thought, of course they thought you were a god, you idiot! You created a farm from nothing by yourself. You don't even know what the proper tools for such an endeavor are. You just guessed. How else is a mortal supposed to interpret that? As it turns out, it was much worse than I had imagined. Feral and Dovroder didn't mistake me for their god. They didn't mistake me at all. I put up wards around the farm. and then changed my appearance and traveled the island. Changing my appearance turned out to be a more intricate process than I thought. I'd never done it before. No need, really. Wizards can recognize each other by ways other than sight. And what possible need would I have to tailor my appearance to the needs of a mortal? But still in all, I managed it. Wherever I saw a place of worship, it was to the great god Rafe. The statuary throughout these temples were all unmistakably of me. Shoddy workmanship for the most part, but definitely me. The religion got its start a millennium ago, so obviously I did set myself up as a deity before departing. I don't remember it, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. One priest was very helpful in showing me some of these sacred texts. It was so rare, he said, to find someone outside the priesthood who could read. However, none of the religion's tenets had any significance to me, though some of them sounded like the kind of idiotic thing I was fond of making mortals do in my youth. For example, one of the rules was that no fish would be eaten on the first day of the month. The texts claimed that this had something to do with sacrifice to show piety or some such, but one childhood memory I did retain was that by the time I reached my teen years, I was well and truly sick of fish, and wanted there to be at least one day a month where it would be no part of any meal. Obviously, I had made my wishes manifest when I deified myself. The part I was most curious about were the texts relating to Rafthrasa's return to his people. Every single reference to me was capitalized, which also sounds like the kind of thing I would have insisted upon. Apparently, Rafthasa would return in secret, disguising himself as a commoner until one of the devout would recognize him. Rafthasa would then bless this one, called the first disciple, and he or she would go forth and proclaim his return. Well, Feral and Dovroder did their parts just fine, and so did I up until we got to the blessing part. More overt questioning of the priest, to wit, by forcing truthful answers out of him rather than the religious gobbledygook he usually gave to the devout, revealed that the texts relating to the return were written after the departure by the priests who desperately didn't want to lose the faith of the devout just because a god who had been so tangible was now gone. Apparently I went on a great quest, and I would return when the goal was found. The exact nature of this goal was something the priests and the devout would argue for centuries, and proved to be the subject of some of the livelier philosophical debates in the church. Several priests devoted their lives to trying to learn what the goal was. I slammed the book shut in disgust, which elicited a cry from the priest. The book was old, and that kind of treatment could irreparably damage the fragile paper. Not that I cared. I was half tempted to burn all the texts to cinders. These people were pathetic. I'd probably come to this conclusion before 1,000 years ago and left in disgust. But there was nowhere left to go this time. And damn it, despite the fact that it was populated by imbeciles, Kartia in general, and that farm in particular, were my home now. I continue to farm on my own. I've gotten more satisfaction out of creating that farm than from any of the inane conquests I'd manufactured over the last millennium. I'd keep growing my vegetables and herbs, keep picking fruit from the various trees, keep selling Gearsel artichokes to the elves, and that would be that. Except when I needed to sell off crop yields, though, I would stay away from the Kartians themselves. Once again, my plans were skewed by reality. When I returned home, I found a huge crowd of people, led by Feral, who stood on a rock, gathered just outside the wards I'd placed. Odd that no one had broken through them, which would have alerted me instantly to an invasion, and also incinerated whoever penetrated. I gazed at them using my power and found that a black-haired woman wearing the garb of a priest standing near Feral had a very minor facility with the power of the earth. That meant she was able to see the wards, invisible though they were to the naked eye, and thus prevent anyone from actually going through. I hadn't changed my appearance back to my usual looks, so I decided to blend in with the crowd and see what nonsense Feral spouted. Dovroder, by the way, was nowhere to be found. Obviously, he had actually listened when I instructed them to get out.
At last he has been returned to us,
Feral was carrying on.
Rafthasa has come to save us from the pestilence that has gripped our soil. He has come back, as was prophesied, and I am his first disciple. Let us all join hands and pray to him.
Oh, please, I said. Somehow Feral heard me. Then again, the devout were so silently hanging on to his every word, not surprising, he was one of the holiest people on the island right present, that any other words would be like a beacon.
What was that?
Pharrell bellowed.
Who interrupts the holy word?
I sighed, getting a bit full of ourselves, Pharrell. Projecting my voice, I said, I do. What proof do we have that you are truly the first disciple? Pharrell looked at me as if I'd sprouted another head.
I have brought the devout here, to the place of Rafthras's return.
We only have your word for it that this is the site of the return. Pharrell sighed with feigned impatience.
His holy guards have been erected to protect this holiest of holies from being defiled by the unworthy. Sister Gilman has seen the holy guards with her sight.
How do we know that you and Sister Gilman haven't conspired to deceive us?
Well, what purpose could that possibly serve? What is your name, that I can tell Rafthrasa who you are, so he can smite you for daring to doubt the word of his first disciple?
My name is Grex, I replied, choosing an alias at random. I tell you this freely because I don't believe you will ever be able to bring that information to Rafthrasa, because I don't believe you are in a position to tell him anything. To answer your question, your motive is obvious. You were just a farmhand. Now you're a holy man. Quite a jump in status.
I am telling you, Grex the heretic.
Oh, wonderful, I got my own title.
That I do not lie. Rafthrasa has returned, and I am his first disciple.
I require proof.
The devout should require no proof.
Well, as I said, we only have your word that the holy guards are in place.
I see nothing that would prevent me from walking past that rock you're standing on and entering the farmland.
Pharrell smiled.
What proof is it that you want, heretic?
The holy guards keep the unworthy out, yes?
This is true.
He wasn't lying, either, since the unworthy were basically those who should not be in sight of the god. I could allow certain people passage through the wards if I so desired, and those were probably the priests, since they were my contact to the devout. At least, that's probably how I did it. It would certainly make the most sense. I wish I could remember the details. I said, then you should be able to pass through the guards with no trouble, yes? Pharrell hesitated. You are the first disciple, I continued. If you are not worthy, then who is?
Of course, but
what? Pharrell straightened, cleared his throat, and said,
Of course I am worthy. I shall prove it to you. Then we shall hang you where you stand for your heresy.
Then he took several steps backward and was incinerated before everybody's eyes. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The order that Pharrell had maintained with his theoretically holy words evaporated as people panicked, cried out, fell to their knees, and started backing away from the rock. I quadrupled my size, so I towered over everyone, but kept the Grex disguise since I didn't want anyone to associate me with all the statuary floating around Cartia.
Silence!
I bellowed. Everyone was very quiet after that. I am not your god. Rafthras's return has not yet come. All of you will leave this place now or meet the same fate as the pretender Pharrell. Begone! They scattered. Within a few minutes, no one remained. I decided to leave the wards up, and I went back to my farming. Sadly, peace was not mine to be had. Within a few days, another, smaller crowd gathered. I managed to frighten them off, but a few days later, more came. Some the same as the previous crowd, others new faces. Again, I scattered them. Again, they came back. I tried expanding the wards, but the idiots always seemed to know where they were and stayed just outside them. Only once did one of them try to pass through, which is what alerted me to their presence on that particular occasion. After about the 8th time, I was ready to commit violence. Still in the guise of Grex the heretic, I stepped through the wards and cried out, "Begone from my sight!" I punctuated this request with a lightning bolt, which singed the hair of a few of them. As they ran off, I yelled after them, "Anyone else I see invading my domain shall be destroyed." That'll just renew their faith. I turned to face the voice, surprised that there was one who hadn't run screaming. The voice belonged to a woman, leaning comfortably against a nearby tree. She was tall for her gender, with long, flowing black hair. Sister Gilman, the one with the minor talent who could see the wards. This explained why only one person broke through them, if she had been here to detect the boundaries. As before, she was dressed in priestly robes, though she obviously had not cleaned them since her initial venture here with Pharrell. I asked her, "What are you blathering about, woman? The more you display your phenomenal power, the more they believe that you are Rathrasa. I don't know if you've noticed, but the crowds have grown larger each time. I hadn't, actually. The numbers didn't concern me. Their presence alone was irksome. Why do you deny yourself, my lord? She asked. You are obviously Rathrasa. The prophecies have all been fulfilled. Those prophecies were made up by your predecessors when Rathrasa left this island a millennium ago. Nevertheless, who else could do what you have done? Who else could so change his appearance? I glowered at her. What makes you think I have changed my appearance? She smiled. I can see it, the same way I can see your guards, my lord. I returned the smile. Ah, yes. You're what Milos used to call a hedge wizard. And I chuckled. I failed to see the humor, my lord. You wouldn't, I said, realizing that Milos's Bendrati pun didn't translate into the Kartian language. In any case, you possess a fraction of control over what I control absolutely. Yes, I have been granted a small blessing of your holiness. It is why I chose to live in your service, my lord. Stop calling me that! I'm no god. I'm just a simple, ordinary human being like everyone else who can call lightning from the sky, operate a farm with no outside help, not even machinery, who... Enough! You're trying my patience, woman. She pushed herself off from the tree and approached me. So are you! I spent my life dedicated to your service, waiting, sacrificing, praying, hoping against hope that you would come back and save us from this miserable famine. Instead, I find that you're nothing more than a selfish, brutish bully who cares nothing for what his people are going through. I grabbed her by the shoulders. Yes! That's exactly right! Finally, someone on this misbegotten island gets it! Sister, I will say it again. I am not a god. Apparently, I once set myself up as a deity on a whim here, but that was 1,000 years ago. I am a simple, ordinary human who was unlucky enough to have supreme power. Unlucky? She seemed stunned by this. I would gladly give up everything to have power such as yours. Would you? I chuckled. Perhaps you would. I'm sure when I was young and stupid, I thought the same thing. I must have if I went to all the trouble of making myself the focal point of my home island's religion. But all 1,000 years of supreme power has given me is a complete and total sense of waste and frustration. That and a tremendous amount of chaos in my wake. I laughed. You're a perfect example, Sister Gilman. You said you devoted your life to worship of Rathrasa, yes? She nodded. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. You've taken something I used as entertainment, as sport, and magnified it into something grotesque. My coming back here was whim, not the conclusion of the great quest. Wasn't it? She asked. This brought me up short. I beg your pardon? It is written that Rathrasa, that you, left when you grew weary of your holy duties and so went on a great quest. I chuckled again. Well, I certainly did grow weary. At least I assumed boredom was the reason I left. It was the only reason I ever did anything new, really, whether it was arriving someplace or leaving another one. Gilman continued. What the quest was, we were never told. But when the quest was ended, you would return. Yes, I know. I've read those texts. None of it has anything remotely to do with reality. No. You did leave on a quest, yes? No! I simply wish to get as far away from this place as possible. An urge I'm coming to feel again, truth be told. And do what when you left? Find somewhere else to conquer, somewhere else to rule. Find other wizards to gain power from. So you had a goal in mind? Well, not a specific one, but, well, yes, I suppose I did. She smiled. What do you think a quest is, my lord? I sighed. Semantics again. But she didn't stop there. Or perhaps your quest was to find something more fulfilling, and, as you just told me, you didn't find it. Nothing fulfilled you, so you decided to return to Kartia. When you lost your sense of fulfillment, you came back to your people. I'm sorry, my lord, but save for the fact that you killed your first disciple, as far as I'm concerned, you fulfilled the prophecy of the return to the letter. I found myself unable to respond to that. How could I? The mind of the fanatic could easily twist anything to meet its needs. Fine, I said. You want to believe those texts? By all means, believe them. Go right on believing them. You want to believe that Rathrasa has returned? Fine. I allowed my face to return to the one I was born with, which elicited a gasp from Gilman. Rathrasa has returned to his people, and his first command to the devout is for the devout to leave him alone and stay away from him. Sadly, my wrath had little effect on her. Then again, I had been going to great lengths to convince her of my lack of divinity. She said, It shouldn't be too hard, my lord. A few years are as nothing to someone like yourself, and that is all it will be before the devout are all dead. It'll be a lot less than that if you keep milling about outside my farm, believe me. She turned on her heel to walk away, but continued speaking. I will bring the holy word of Rathrasa to the devout. I will tell them that our Lord has indeed returned, for he wishes to observe the slow death of his people firsthand as they starve to death. I will tell them that he has forsaken us. Well, it's about time that someone figured it out. The famine story was ludicrous, of course. It had simply been a bad run of crops. These things happen and run in cycles. It usually results in an apocalyptic panic. People start running around proclaiming that the end of the world will come on the next solstice, deterred only slightly by the solstice's arrival with comparatively little fanfare. I certainly wasn't about to let some idiot hedge wizard convince me that I should do anything other than what I had been doing, tending to my farm and damn little else. Months passed in blissful solitude. The only other animal life I saw were the girl who brought my items to the marketplace, the elven captain who took the Gearsome artichokes, and the collection of bugs that tried to eat through my vegetable crop. One afternoon, I stood on a ladder, picking fruit. I didn't need to do it manually, of course, but I rather enjoyed it. I was generally trying to do more things with my hands, though for some reason I still couldn't bring myself to obtain a plow. And I found it more gratifying. At last, I could live in peace. Just as I tossed a badly bruised fruit into the wheelbarrow I used for compost, I felt a disturbance in the wards. Some idiot had once again tried to penetrate them. Sighing, I finished removing the fruit from the trees and separating the good from the bad with my power, which took all of a second, and then moved myself to where the disturbance was. A score of the devout had gathered, laying offerings. Upon seeing me, they all fell to their knees. "Give us your holy word, my lord," one of them said. I shook my head. You people are staggeringly stupid. You believe my word to be holy law, yes? Fine. The last time you imbeciles invaded my land, the oh-so-holy words of Rathrasa were, anyone else I see invading my domain shall be destroyed. To their credit, a few of them realized what exactly this meant. Most of them, however, burned to a pile of cinders from my fireball in complete ignorance. I directed the ashes to the compost heap. May as well put them to good use. Then I summoned Sister Gilman from wherever she was on the island. She appeared before me laying down, asleep, dressed in night clothes. I woke her up. What exactly does it take to get through to you people? I asked her without preamble. Do I have to kill all of you to get you to leave me alone? The people are desperate. On top of everything else, an infestation destroyed what little crop there was this year. I blinked. Infestation? Of course, you idiot, I admonished myself. It was you. If you were ravaged by bugs, it stands to reason the rest of the island would be as well. They thought your anger would be assuaged by offerings. I tried to convince them that it would be foolish, but they thought they had nothing to lose. Interesting perspective. They, in fact, had everything to lose and have now lost it. Her eyes widened. You killed them. Of course I killed them. You were there. You heard me promise that I would. And we can't have Rathrasa's holy word being broken, now can we? Gilman started to say something, then stopped. You know, I was about to utter an oath, praying that the devout who came here would not be dead. But that oath would have been to you. And there's little point in swearing such an oath, is there? None whatsoever, I replied, my voice hard. They won't be the last, you know, she said after a moment. More will come, with bigger offerings. Offerings they probably can't afford, but that won't matter to them. All they want is succor from their Lord. I looked at her, my mouth hanging open in amazement. You're serious, aren't you? Even if I kill more of them, they'll keep coming back. They're starving to death. What would you have them do? Same thing everyone does when famine strikes. The same thing you mortals always do. Either live on a little while longer, or die. That's it? What do you think mortal means, sister? Sometime very soon they're going to die, whether it's in my hands or not. So their suffering means nothing to you at all. I laughed. Why should it? The only thing in this world that means anything to me at all is being left alone. And it seems even that is being denied me. Silence fell between us. I wondered why I'd even bothered to summon her and was about to send her back to her bed when she spoke. There is a way to get them to leave you alone. Oh? I said, skeptical. I couldn't believe she'd thought of something I hadn't. Answer their prayers. What? Do as they ask. It's not beyond your power. Your farm alone has been immune to the ravages that have plagued us. Would it be asking so much for you to extend that blessing? I started to angrily point out that it wasn't a blessing, then decided it wasn't worth it. Instead, I said, no. Why not? I am not a god. I'm a human being who is trying to live out his life in peace. The only way you will get peace is if you answer the prayers of the devout, my lord. I stared at her. It was the first time she had called me my lord since I summoned her. And then I considered her proposal and realized she was absolutely right. Very well, I finally said. I closed my eyes to concentrate. Then I altered the soil across the land. It took a bit more effort than I'd been expecting, but the process still was quick. I also wiped out all of the island's bugs, as I had already done on my own land. It is done. The infestation has been eliminated, the soil is at its richest. And I want you to go back to the devout, and I want you to carry a message from the almighty Rafe. I can promise that Cartia will know more prosperity than it has ever known, but it is conditional. And that condition is that I be left alone. If so much as one person breaches the holy guards uninvited, I will sink the island into the ocean forevermore. Is that understood, Sister Gilman? She fell to her knees. Perfectly, my lord. I will carry your holy word to all the devout, and I thank you for your kind indulgence. With that, I sent her home. I wouldn't have believed it possible, but the morons actually had the wherewithal to leave me alone after that. A few people did wander accidentally into my land, but I had altered the wards so that it would only repel those coming in search of Rafe. Lost souls desperate for a roof would not be incinerated. And so I continued to till the soil, to cultivate the flowers, to pick the fruit off the trees. One year, I even obtained a plow in exchange for a yield of vegetables. Sister Gilman rose to a position of prominence within the church, which wasn't terribly surprising, since she alone had heard the true word of Rafe and brought it to the devout. I even occasionally sent donations to the church under the name Grex. My captain died in a shipwreck, and I lacked the interest to obtain another mode of transport to elven lands, so I finally let the Gearsome artichoke crop die out. One day, decades after I first came back to Cartia, I looked out on my farm and smiled. Finally, for the first time in over a millennium, I was happy. That is my third published short story. I thought of this because the guidelines for the Magic anthologies stated that they didn't want to see stories about planeswalkers because planeswalkers were like gods and there really isn't much you can do story-wise with a god. To which my response was, challenge accepted! And I thought, well, okay, what happens if... I was inspired specifically by the scene in the Monty Python movie The Life of Brian, where Brian, who has been mistaken for the Messiah, basically yells and screams at the people who are trying to worship him, will you just please fuck off? And they all say, well, how would you like us to fuck off, our Lord? And the story grew out of that. So, I think the book's still available, probably, maybe, I don't know. I should check online. But it was called Distant Plains. It was published in 1996. See if you can find it. If you can, let me know. You can find me online at DeCandido.net. My blog is at DeCandido.wordpress.com. My Patreon is patreon.com/KRAD, and you can find me in all those places. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and please stay safe.